Picture this, right? It is Friday morning, July 23rd, 1971. You are standing on the campus of Washington State University in Pullman.
And it is the middle of summer, so that usual chaotic, buzzing student energy is just completely gone.
Yeah, exactly. The air is heavy, it is sun-drenched, and it is just incredibly quiet, almost like the whole campus is holding its breath.
Right.
So a university custodian is doing his morning rounds. His keys are jingling in the silence, and he walks into the lounge of Stevens Hall. Now, Stevens Hall is a dormitory that has been totally locked down and closed off for summer renovations.
Right, so he is expecting to find just the usual remnants of a construction site, plaster dust coating the floors, maybe some forgotten hand tools, the smell of fresh paint.
Exactly. But instead, he steps into the lounge and finds a bizarre, just deeply unsettling sight that instantly makes the hair on the back of his neck stand up.
Because right in the middle of that room, a massive 5 by 5 foot swath of the dark green carpet is just missing.
Just gone.
Completely gone. And it hasn't been carefully lifted by professional contractors, rolling up the edges. It looks frantic. It looks like it has been furiously hacked out of the floor, probably with a pair of heavy shears or scissors, leaving this jagged, ugly square of bare, cold concrete.
Yeah, and the missing carpet isn't even the most disturbing part. Because sitting just a few feet away from that jagged square of concrete is an abandoned woven purse.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Inside that purse, the custodian finds a headscarf, a German language textbook, and several highly personal handwritten letters.
So this clearly isn't just bizarre campus vandalism.
No, not at all. And that is what we are getting into today. In this deep dive, we are opening up a stack of original case files, forensic reports, and decades of investigative notes to understand what really happened in that room.
Because that violently hacked square of carpet is the very first chilling physical clue in the 55-year-old unsolved murder of a brilliant young woman named Joyce LePage.
Right. We are going to walk you through the timeline, dissect the forensics, and examine the psychology of the suspects to figure out how a vibrant college student vanished into thin air.
And to understand the sheer strangeness of that purse, sitting in an abandoned, locked-down dorm room on a Friday morning, we first have to look at the psychology of who Joyce was. And, well, more importantly, why she was hiding.
Yeah, hiding is the key word here.
It is. So she was 21 years old, a farmer's daughter from Pasco, Washington, but she completely defied the conventional mold of a 1971 co-ed. Her mind was just always moving.
She was a really dynamic person.
Totally. She was taking intensive summer classes in chemistry and German to graduate early. She practiced meditation, she played the piano beautifully, and she listened to heavy rock bands like Steppenwolf.
Not to mention, she was literally taken to the skies. She actually earned her private pilot's license when she was just 18 years old, and she spent her free summer afternoons skydiving.
Which is amazing.
Right. This is a young woman who was adventurous, highly capable, and just fiercely independent. But that fierce independence had recently driven her into a highly precarious living situation.
Yeah, the roommate situation.
Exactly. For the summer, she was subleasing a room in an off-campus apartment with a male roommate named Bruce Beerbaum. By all accounts, she found him incredibly overbearing, and she actively wanted to avoid him.
Which I think anyone who has ever done the college roommate coin toss can relate to, right? Sometimes you just need to get away.
Absolutely. So think of it like an aircraft turning off its transponder to drop off the radar. Joyce decided that to protect her peace of mind, she was going to go completely dark. She quietly took over the head residence room in Stevens Hall, which is that same dorm that was closed for renovations.
Right.
She would literally sneak in through a ground floor window just to sleep.
She essentially created a secret sanctuary. In a letter to a friend, she described using the empty dorm as her private hideaway, where she could shower, watch television, and play the piano in the lounge without anyone bothering her.
It sounds kind of peaceful until you realize the risk.
Exactly. Because if we connect this to the bigger picture, here is the profound danger in that kind of isolation. She was so hyper-focused on avoiding one specific annoyance, her roommate, that she created a massive, dangerous blind spot in her daily routine.
Yeah, nobody knew where she really was.
Right. Her family back in Pasco had no idea she was sleeping in a construction zone. Her friends knew about the hideaway, but they weren't checking on her there.
Yeah.
She made herself invisible to the very people who could have recognized she was in trouble.
And that illusion of safety was actually already cracking. In one of her undated letters, she casually mentions a terrifying close call.
Oh, this part is so creepy.
It really is. She writes that a workman accidentally stumbled upon her while she was hanging out in the head residence room. He asked her where the storm windows were, mumbled an apology, and then just left.
Just left her there.
Yeah, she brushed it off, but the reality is chilling. I mean, a stranger now knew that a 21-year-old woman was living completely alone in an otherwise abandoned, unsecured building.
Which, perfectly and tragically, sets the stage for a timeline where her absence went unnoticed for entirely too long. Because she had effectively erased herself from the grid, that crucial window of time where someone might have intervened just vanished.
So let's unpack this and actually reconstruct that last 24 hours. Just a couple of days prior, on July 20th, she wrote a warm letter to her parents. She told them she was planning to come home to Pasco that upcoming weekend.
Right, she had stuff to do.
Yeah, she had an eye doctor appointment scheduled, and she was really excited to watch the Waterfalls annual boat race. She was looking forward to the future. Then comes Thursday, July 22nd.
Her last known day.
Right. She spends the afternoon doing what she loves. She goes skydiving at the Pullman-Moscow Regional Airport with her good friend Hal Wood and his girlfriend Patty. After they wrap up the lesson, the three of them ride over the border to Moscow, Idaho, to grab a few beers at the Spruce Tavern.
Sounds like a perfect, carefree summer evening.
It does. And around 10:00 p.m., Hal and Patty drop Joyce off in the front yard of her official off-campus apartment. They say their goodbyes, they watch her standing in the yard, and they drive off into the night on their motorcycle. That is the very last confirmed sighting of Joyce LePage alive.
Because the sun comes up on Friday, July 23rd, and the alarm bells start ringing. But because of her isolated living situation, they only ring in total isolation.
What do you mean by that?
Well, at 8:22 a.m., the campus custodian finds the hacked carpet and the purse in the dorm lounge. He turns it in, but the campus police have absolutely no context for it. 2 hours later, Joyce fails to show up for a 10:30 a.m. German exam.
Which is very unlike her.
Extremely. Then that afternoon, she is a no-show for a 4:30 p.m. skydiving lesson with Hal. Later that evening, she misses a tentative date she had arranged to go to a high school dance in Oakdale with an agriculture teacher named Mike Finch.
Right, so that is 4 separate people or places that missed her in one day.
Exactly, and by the time the weekend rolls around, she completely misses her trip home to Pasco. Her family is calling her apartment, but her roommate Bruce just assumes she's still dodging him and tells them she isn't around.
It takes a full week and a half for all those isolated alarm bells to finally sync up. On Monday, August 2nd, her father, Walter, realizes something is horribly wrong and officially calls the campus police to report her missing.
Which changes everything.
Yeah, this is when the investigation shifts from a passive inquiry into a physical hunt across the landscape of eastern Washington. And the very first thing police start looking for is her car, which is a light green 1966 Dodge Coronet.
And they actually find it pretty fast.
They do. By 1:04 p.m. that same day, they find it. But the location makes zero sense. It's parked outside a fraternity house at 1704 Opal Street, which is a full 7 blocks away from her apartment.
Right, just completely out of the way.
Tucked under the windshield wiper is a parking ticket dated July 29th, meaning it had been sitting there for days. The doors are locked. Peering through the glass, police can actually see her textbooks, scattered papers, and a pair of women's shoes left inside.
And this is where we run into the profound frustration of 1971 police procedures. The Washington State Crime Lab was called in to process the Dodge Coronet right there on Opal Street. But we have to understand why they handled it the way they did.
Yeah, it was a very different time for forensics.
Exactly. In that era, forensic processing was highly visual, not microscopic. Investigators looked at the car, saw no shattered glass, no pooled blood, and no obvious signs of a violent struggle.
So they just assumed it wasn't a crime scene.
Pretty much. Because there was no glaring visual evidence of a crime, standard operating procedure dictated that they simply hand the vehicle back to her family. Current investigators strongly suspect the car was never thoroughly dusted for fingerprints, nor was it vacuumed for trace evidence like hair or fibers.
Which is just heartbreaking. They effectively threw away what was arguably the most crucial piece of physical evidence outside the dorm room itself.
They really did.
And handing the car back meant they couldn't fully analyze the absolute absurdity of where it was parked. I mean, think of her daily routine as a tight geographic triangle. Her apartment is the bottom left point, Stevens Hall is the bottom right point, Opal Street is way up at the top, completely out of the way.
Right. It wasn't on her route to class, and it wasn't near her secret hideaway.
It's a geographical impossibility for her daily routine. Someone moved that car to Opal Street. But for 9 agonizing months, that oddly parked car and that missing square of green carpet were the only puzzle pieces the investigators had.
And that silence held until the spring of the following year, April 16th, 1972. I want you to visualize the rugged, vast landscape of eastern Washington. It is defined by steep basalt cliffs, deep ravines, and just unforgiving terrain.
Yeah, it is beautiful but treacherous.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that Sunday, a teenage boy and his mother were out hunting for gemstones in a place called Wah Canyon. This is a brutal, steep gorge about 25 minutes southwest of the university campus. While scrambling down a particularly treacherous cliff face, the boy stumbled upon something horrific.
Yeah, the terrain was so steep and inaccessible that when the sheriff's deputies arrived, they literally had to tie a heavy rope to the bumper of their patrol car just to rappel down the cliff face to reach the site.
Oh my God, that is intense.
Right. Resting on an embankment about 3 feet above a seasonal creek bed, they found skeletal remains. And those remains were wrapped inside the missing 5x5 green carpet that had been hacked out of Stevens Hall 9 months earlier.
Wow. And the forensic details of this recovery scene are what elevate this case from a tragic murder to a highly complex staging. The remains weren't just wrapped in the green carpet. They were also tightly bundled in an olive drab U.S. Army Medical Corps blanket.
A military blanket.
Yes. And the entire package was bound together around the pelvis with heavy-duty fishing twine. When the medical examiner examined the remains, they found she was wearing women's floral underwear, but the sides had been cleanly sliced open.
Okay, that is an incredibly disturbing detail. Now, you mentioned the bones in your notes earlier. The autopsy report noted markings on the skeletal remains that indicated possible knife punctures. But how can forensic anthropologists definitively look at a bone that has been exposed to the elements and predatory wildlife in a rugged canyon for 9 months and say, with certainty, that is a knife wound?
It comes down to microscopic margins. When an animal like a coyote or a feral dog scavenges a bone, their teeth leave what anthropologists call U-shaped striations. The edges of the mark are crushed and rounded from the blunt force of the bite.
Okay, that makes sense.
But a knife blade leaves a distinct V-shaped defect. The margins are sharp, clean, and linear. The medical examiner in 1972 saw those clean, V-shaped cuts on her ribs, strongly suggesting she was stabbed multiple times.
But here is the forensic anomaly that completely baffled the crime lab. Despite those puncture wounds, there was absolutely 0 blood found on the green carpet and no blood on the military blanket.
Wait, really? No blood at all?
None. Think about the mechanics of that. If she was stabbed repeatedly and there is no blood on the carpet she was wrapped in, well, that heavily implies she was killed on the bare concrete floor of the lounge, allowed to bleed out, and then rolled into the carpet long after the fact.
Or she was killed somewhere else entirely, cleaned, and then brought back to the dorm to be wrapped in the carpet.
Yes. Either way, it shows a terrifying level of calculation.
It really does. But the physical materials used in the staging, specifically that U.S. Army Medical Corps blanket and the proximity to the construction zone in Stevens Hall, well, it immediately forced investigators to look closely at the men in her immediate orbit.
Let me push back on that for a second, though. We have a violently hacked carpet, a young co-ed missing from a college town in the Pacific Northwest in the early 1970s, and sliced underwear at the crime scene.
Right, I see where you're going with this.
It sounds exactly like the bizarre, sexually motivated staging of a serial killer. Specifically, Ted Bundy, who was actively hunting in Washington state during this exact time period. I mean, why wouldn't police zero in on him?
It is a totally logical leap, and honestly, Bundy was heavily investigated for this exact reason. We have to look at all the possibilities. But when you break down the behavioral mechanisms of this crime, it completely deviates from Bundy's established modus operandi.
Yeah, how so?
Bundy relied on blitz attacks, or feigning injury, to lure victims from highly public places. Beaches, crowded walkways, parking lots. He was an opportunist,
Right.
navigating the dark corridors of a closed-down, locked dormitory under renovation to find one specific girl who was secretly sleeping in a head residence room. That requires intimate, prior knowledge of her hidden routine.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, Bundy outright denied involvement before his execution, and behavioral analysts agree that this crime wasn't random. It was targeted.
So we have to look at the people who were actually there. Let's start with suspect number 1, Robert Loren Johnson.
Okay, the contractor.
Right. He was a professional contractor laying tile in Arts Hall, which is just 100 to 200 yards away from Stevens Hall. The timeline for Johnson is undeniably suspicious. He admitted to police that he was working late on the campus the night of Thursday, July 22nd, staying until about 2:30 in the morning.
And off-campus police officer even noted seeing Johnson's car parked right outside Stevens Hall in the middle of the night.
Exactly. Plus, rumors were heavily circulating around the construction crews that summer that a worker had been messing around with a girl in the closed dorms.
And Joyce was the only woman sleeping in that building. We already know from her letter that a worker had stumbled upon her previously.
Right. But despite his proximity and the late-night timeline, Robert Loren Johnson submitted to a polygraph test early in the investigation, and the results showed no deception. Police dug into his background, found he was a married father with no glaring history of violence, and eventually moved their focus elsewhere.
Which brings us to the man who remained the primary target of this investigation for decades. Suspect number 2, Mike Finch.
Oh man,
Yeah, he was the 27-year-old agriculture teacher from Oakdale, the guy Joyce supposedly had a date with for the high school dance on Friday. He was an ex-Army man, which immediately provides a potential terrifying link to that U.S. Army Medical Corps blanket.
That is a huge red flag.
And the psychological profile his peers provided to police was grim. He was known as a heavy, aggressive drinker. Friends told investigators that when he drank, his personality shifted darkly. One of Joyce's own friends was quoted in the original case file stating, "The more you knew Mike Finch, the less you liked him."
Wow. So the behavioral red flags were abundant, but here's where it gets really interesting. It was his alibi that truly caused investigators to lock onto him. When you map out the geographic movements he claimed to have made over the weekend she disappeared, it defies all logic.
It really does. It reads like a chaotic, desperate attempt to explain away missing chunks of time.
Let's actually trace this route because it is absurd. He tells police that on Friday night, he was up north in Spokane, Washington. He says he called Joyce from a friend's house there. Then he claims he got in his car and drove south to Pullman around midnight.
Okay, a midnight drive.
Right, and he says he drove past her apartment, saw the lights were off, and decided not to stop. Then he claims he kept driving further southwest to Pasco for the weekend boat races.
Wait, but he originally told police that his actual plan was to pick Joyce up, drive her back to Pullman for her Monday morning classes, and then he would drive himself to a teacher's conference in Bellingham.
Yes, and to understand why that is a totally fabricated itinerary, you have to look at a map of Washington state. Spokane is north, Pullman is south, Pasco is deep in the southwest. Bellingham is a 5-hour, grueling drive to the extreme northwest corner of the state near the Canadian border.
It makes absolutely no sense. Nobody drives from Pasco back east to Pullman and then zigzags entirely across the state to Bellingham.
Exactly. It is a dizzying, nonsensical route across hundreds of miles of 2-lane highways in the dead of night. You only invent a route that chaotic if you were trying to cover your tracks, or if you need a built-in excuse for why someone might have spotted your car in different random locations at very specific times.
Right, and his story just kept shifting. He told investigators he couldn't even remember what day the dance was supposed to be. Sometimes he said Friday, other times he said Saturday.
But here's the detail that I just cannot let go of. Just a few weeks after Joyce vanished, Mike Finch got into a severe rollover accident and completely totaled his car. Was he driving drunk? Was he consumed by guilt? Or was he actively trying to destroy trace evidence that might have been left in his vehicle?
Those are the exact questions investigators wrestled with.
Yeah.
Now, it is crucial to note that Mike Finch was re-interviewed in 2013, over 40 years after the murder. The cold case detectives finally convinced him to take a polygraph test. And he passed it.
Passed it.
Well, we have to understand the science behind that. A polygraph does not detect lies. It measures physiological arousal, heart rate, sweat gland activity, blood pressure. When you have a 40-year gap between an event and an interview, a psychological phenomenon known as memory consolidation occurred.
Okay, so his memory literally changed.
Yes.
Yeah.
Human memory is highly malleable. If Finch fabricated an alibi in 1971 to cover up a panic-induced accident, he has spent 4 decades repeating that exact narrative to himself. By 2013, his brain may have fundamentally accepted that fabricated timeline as his absolute truth.
So his body wouldn't register the physiological stress of deception.
Exactly. He died in 2024, taking whatever he truly knew to his grave.
The army blanket, the chaotic driving route, the totaled car, it just leaves you with a knot in your stomach. It feels like the answer is right there.
Yeah.
But just when you think you have a handle on the narrative, there is one final devastating piece of evidence that forces us to look in a completely different direction.
And it brings us right back to the one clue that never made sense. which is the seemingly random location of Joyce's abandoned Dodge Coronet on Opal Street.
Right. We established earlier that Opal Street was a geographical impossibility for her daily routine. It wasn't near her apartment, and it wasn't near Stevens Hall. It was parked right outside a fraternity house.
But it turns out that location wasn't random at all.
Not at all. Just 2 doors down from where her car was abandoned was a house occupied by a local meditation group. Joyce was highly active in that group. In fact, she was actively making plans to permanently move into that exact house at the end of the summer.
Which completely shatters the timeline. The car wasn't just dumped in a random neighborhood to confuse police. It was parked deliberately near her future home.
Yeah. And here is the final chilling detail that was uncovered in her personal belongings. In one of the last letters she ever wrote, penned right before she was murdered, Joyce revealed a terrifying secret she had just learned about her new living situation.
This part is so unsettling.
She wrote to her friend that she had just discovered one of her future housemates, someone she was literally preparing to live with, had previously been institutionalized in a mental health facility for repeatedly trying to strangle people.
It forces a complete paradigm shift, doesn't it? We spend all our time analyzing the men she dated, the transient construction workers, the dark corners of her secret hideaway in the dorms. But this letter suggests the real, imminent threat might have been sitting right inside the house she was preparing to call home.
It really leaves you with this haunting realization about the illusion of safety. We spend so much energy trying to protect ourselves. We dodge overbearing roommates. We build secret hideaways. We lock our doors against the random monsters we think are roaming the streets outside.
But how often are we completely, willfully blind to the threats we actually invite inside?
Exactly. How well do we really know the strangers we choose to share our lives with, or the secrets hiding just on the other side of a shared wall? Keep turning over those stones and stay endlessly curious.